childhood sweetheart had not waited for him and had married another person, and so it was blow after blow after blow, and then he starts getting questioned. He kind of kept in the pattern of just writing these blank checks. And Jefferson then was done being president, and James Madison came in, and James Madison was saying, hey, I'm not cashing these, like, you don't have authority for me to write these checks for Louisiana. And Lewis is embarrassed and shamed by this, and he's going back to Washington, D.C. to kind of clear his name and clear the air. And I'm sorry, the other super problem is that he seems to have struggled with one of the most significant cases of writer's block ever. That again, as I've noted, Lewis is in charge of this expedition, and he didn't consistently keep his journal. Clark did, and some of the others did. But he's the main one who's gotten all of these he's meticulously kept all of these scientific samples. And he's named nearly 200 different animals that weren't known before, and even more plants that weren't known before. And I've seen his primary biographer claim, well, what the problem is he hasn't put the journals in publishable form, and he needs to get them published so that they get credit for all this. And even Jefferson is frustrated with him and is saying, like, look, you went way over budget and so forth, and I've been criticized from the beginning, and I'm still getting criticized that this was just a big, adventure trip and not worth the money. I need evidence. Like, we promised all this information. You've got to get these things published. And it seems like Lewis never wrote one word to get an editor or did anything to get this published. And his major biographer claims that had he published his journals, that he may well rank second only to Darwin as in importance as a botanist or as a biologist, because he would have had identified so many new species. But he's not going to get the journals published, so other people will come and identify all these various plants and name them and all these various animals, and so all that credit is dispersed. And so back to the story, he's going back to Washington, D.C., supposedly going to handle all of these things, and I don't want to go into the detail, but as near as they can, because frankly, even this did not go well, but he takes his own life on the trail. There's always been some rumors of maybe he was murdered, but I'm persuaded by the argument, again, that his major biographer made, is that there's kind of a missing smoking gun, and that is that Meriwether Lewis's two best friends in the world, Thomas Jefferson and of course William Clark, never seemed to question that this was a suicide. That they seemed to understand that was made the most sense. And both of them certainly had the ability to, if they had thought for a moment that someone had murdered their friend, that they would go and stop that from, or want to investigate that and look into what had happened. So unfortunately, Meriwether Lewis took his own life, which really did have a long-term impact on how he is thought of. They kind of have returned as heroes, and there's interest in him. But even if he had been killed accidentally by Cruzat, who had shot him in the backside, then that probably for a long time his reputation would have been greater, because it would have explained what had happened. So, but as another author about him said, that obviously this is sad, that saddens us, and that we can learn from that, but at the same time we should still celebrate Meriwether Lewis and look to that here was a man who was a man of destiny, who was born to do something, and he got to do that thing. He accomplished it, and that was enough, and that we should still celebrate. So if you go through a couple of the slides here, I think there's one more that I wanted to show. Very quickly, this was Clark's map. Clark was the better cartographer, and so it was huge. You could lay it out on the floor deeper and look at the details. And just a quick thing of note that what you're seeing there is mostly mountains, the Rocky Mountains there, and then all these rivers. And that is an interesting thing, I think, to look for in maps. If you're, just a basic thing on the history of maps. If you look at an 18th century map or an early 19th century map, they're frequently going to look like this. In other words, what will be featured on them, and this one looks more like the mountains are featured, but primarily what is going to be featured are rivers. And then if you look at a mid-19th century or a later 19th century map, it's going to, the dominant thing on the map will be railroads. And then of course if you look at a map from the 20th century or today, the map is all highways and so forth. So the way that people travel is typically what they would emphasize on the map. So they're interested mainly in the rivers at this time. And then one more slide. Okay, so where we started, what is the, what potentially is the unique contribution to freedom, to liberty, to our ideals that came from America, that maybe that unique thing that was added to the tradition from Christianity and Judaism, from the Greeks and the Romans, from the English and so forth, was the frontier. And that we still like this, and that what really makes Americans is this pioneering frontier exploration type of spirit. And so the person who argued that came along much later. In 1890, the United States did a census. The Constitution requires we do a census every 10 years. And in 1890, after they did the census takers made kind of an interesting point. They said, well, everything's been explored in the United States, that the West is now closed, and so forth. And this made a young, up-and-coming historian kind of ponder and think about that. His name was Frederick Jackson Turner, and in 1893, he put forward the only kind of famous theory regarding American history, and that was the frontier thesis, or what's known as the Turner thesis. And that is that what really made America, America was this frontier, this moving frontier line. That what are Americans like? They're democratic, and you always were more democratic on the frontier because like everybody has to chip in and work. What are Americans? They are self-sufficient. Go get them, go do it, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and that's what you have to do on the frontier. That we, are fiercely independent, and that's what you got to do on the frontier. That frankly, that we can be violent, and that's, that the gun and so forth is what makes, gives us freedom, and that's us on the frontier. That frankly, sometimes Americans can be wasteful or think that like resources are just unlimited and so forth. And it always seemed like on the frontier that things were unlimited, that were unlimited. And even on the Lewis and Clark expedition, like they record times and so forth, where it's like, well, we came upon this lake and we caught 400 catfish. And I was like, well, why are you taking, like you can't eat that many catfish that fast. Like why are you like, well, they're here and so forth, we might as well catch them and so forth. But they might have eaten at some points these guys are eating like 9 pounds of meat a day on this trip when they were going up the Missouri. But in any event, Frederick Jackson Turner wondered, well, what would happen to us now that the frontier is closed and so forth. But maybe it turned out that it wasn't, because then we'd already purchased Alaska by that point, but Alaska then is the last frontier. But was it? Because then John F. Kennedy in 1960, his campaign was, well, the new frontier. And then what did Kennedy want to do? Well, let's go to the moon and so forth. And we still spend, rightly or wrongly, billions of dollars saying, well, we're going to explore the moon. And then arguably, his theory isn't nearly as popular as it once was, but some say, well, there still does seem to be something to it. That lots of Americans, we talk about, well, I want to work on the frontiers of science. I want to be on the frontiers of medicine. I want to do the frontier of this. That arguably for most folks, their word for frontier means border between two countries and just not really a place that you can go. For Americans, the frontier seems to be, well, that's where I want to go and keep exploring and doing it. Maybe that's our contribution. And then the final suggestion, which you can undoubtedly read up there, is too that the frontier seemed to be, even if it was closed kind of literally and physically, that maybe we moved, importantly, the frontier to our culture, and we still like to do it in entertainment. So you have, at the same year that Turner came out with his thesis, was a popular year at the same time, even they were showing Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, which would tour Europe and tell America this is what it means to be an American, is this cowboy and so forth. And then the cowboy becomes, and the Western becomes the quintessential movie genre, from the very beginning with the Great Train Robbery to then the the era of John Ford and John Wayne and those moments, and then to the 1970s, kind of the anti-hero with Clint Eastwood and so forth. And the Western is not as popular as it once was, but for many, many decades it really defines heroes, manhood maybe in particular and so forth, of what it means to be an American. Lots of presidents, both in good ways and bad ways, love to associate themselves as we're the cowboy, Ronald Reagan, George W. Bush, and so forth. Lots of folks around the world still kind of think of America as cowboys and so forth. And again, even in our entertainment, as suggested on there, again, the Western is no longer the dominant format, but there's television shows like Justified and Longmire, there's movies like Firefly, or the television show was Firefly, the movie was Serenity, and just 2 weeks ago I didn't know anything about it, but found out that, well, Michael Crichton's Westworld has now become a very popular HBO show, and it's still doing with these Western tropes and so forth. So the frontier, the cowboy, the Western, still important for our sense of identity and maybe contributing to that. But that great story of friendship, that great story of perseverance, of courage, and so forth, Lewis and Clark, one of the key starting points for it. And I hope that you enjoyed learning a little bit more about that great American adventure. So I do thank you for coming, and hope you have a good day.
Let's move your big fat donut muscles and let's go.
Donut?
Yeah.